When it came to Reginald, well, heretics just couldn't catch him. Reginald here? Let's be honest, the dueling swords are a problem. Don't get me wrong, I'm super glad they're on the Zealot and Veteran now, and I personally love them on every level, from aesthetic to playstyle. But let's be real, they're way too good. Everyone knows it. But what makes them too good, and how do we fix it without ruining the weapons? Lucky for you, and thanks to my new streaming hobby, I've already got the data for you. Dueling swords have mid to solid horde clear depending on build, and have downright excellent light and heavy elite kill times, and excellent monstrosity damage. All this in a super light, quick moving package with a fantastic special attack that can stagger crushers, ragers, and maulers, or even reapers, out of their attack chains, and dead stop charging muties on headshot, which by the way is fairly easy to land. On top of that, the special is super quick to weave into a heavy stab chain. Plus, with its 5 dodges and incredible sprint speeds, its cutting potential is basically in the same domain as the combat knife. I mean, I've left this footage playing on screen from a duo game of mine recently, and you can see me just being, well, kind of unethical. So how do we tackle this problem without gutting the weapon entirely? The last thing I want to do is nerf this weapon into obscurity, so we really do have to be cautious. A tune down is not the same thing as a nerf hammer, yet at the same time, speaking of hammers, this thing really has no business outcompeting the Thunder Hammer as the king of armor busting. My ideas boil down to 4 things. We need to reduce sprint speed on this weapon. I shouldn't be able to safely outrun a chaos spawn without worrying about running out of stamina. I looked into the raw weapon stats from the Git repository, and it looks like Dueling Sword has the Ninja 1 stat for its sprint speed, and for that matter, so does the combat knife. Let's just knock that down a peg, really on both of those weapons. The Catechid Sword, for example, is a default sprint template. I've checked a bunch of other weapons, and they all, almost for melee, have default sprint template if they're smaller, lighter weapons. It only goes worse from there for most weapons. One peg down is actually the Assault template, which I haven't found on any melee weapon so far, and I even checked the attack axes. For the record, almost every other small melee weapon in the game that I poked through has a default sprint speed template. The combat knife and dueling sword are the only Ninja 1s. The only weapon I could find with an assault sprint template was actually the bolt pistol and presumably the other pistols. The stats are as follows. As you can see, this is a very minor reduction. Forward deceleration takes a slight reduction, and sprint speed goes from 0.5 through 1.0 to negative 0.2.5 through 0.8. This would still make these weapons the fastest in the game, but would not result in the ability to permanently kite, at least not so easily. We should probably pull down the carapace and unyielding damage a bit. Carapace, maybe about 20%, unyielding I'd land closer to 15. These are not hard numbers, just sort of my gut instinct. Basically, I want to add in about 1 extra or 2 extra stabs to the face for a crusher or mauler, and a few extra swings into a monstrosity or whatever. We really need to reduce special action stagger enough so that it can no longer dead stop muties or stop crusher overheads. But it should still stagger ragers out of their attack chains, and probably maulers too. I don't know if that can be done, but that's the ideal. Lastly, this is not a problem with the weapon per se, but rather the talent tree. This node, Enduring Faith, is too strong, and gives too much durability on weapons that can crit very easily, like the dueling sword and knife. So let's bring that down from the 50% it's at right now to maybe 25% instead. Still a lot of value, but not enormous value. So let's recap the refreshed vision of the weapon. Right now, the performance is something like this graph. I want to take it down to this level. What this means is, as a weapon, it will still be absolutely top tier as a light elite sniping weapon. One might even call it a dueling sword, but it will not be spectacular against heavily armored and high toughness enemies that are able to tank a few stabs or bolt gun rounds for that matter. It will retain its mid performance into hordes, but its safety margins will still be there when fighting more difficult foes or larger groups of enemies. Finally, we'll have pulled down its cutting capacity to something that actually forces the player to fight enemies from time to time. Hopefully that does it without destroying the fun this weapon offers and still leaves it a place in everyone's kit. With that, I'm out. Have a lovely week. I'll be seeing you soon. Thanks so much for visiting, and bye-bye.